we definitely are going to. If you have suggestions, let me know. That's just one of the things I went to. It's just like ever since the beginning. Ever since the beginning, that's been like my thing. You did the little lightning bolts.
Yeah, I love the little cheesiness of it.
I mean, it's just...
All right, so we've decided once again to do a original versus a remake because
they're going over
why
well.
the hell not?
And they're going over well.
Why the hell not?
Our last one that we did was Rob Zombie, Halloween 1 and 2.
And that was a good one because there still is controversy over that.
And it's, shoot, I mean, it's an older movie.
Yeah. This is another one of those where a lot of people who just loved the original and were terrified by the original were super disappointed in the remake.
I was not.
I was not disappointed in the remake, but I still like the original. But after comparing the two side by side, and they feel like completely separate entities to me.
In which, and also you got to remember too, that there's, 17 movies? So how many remakes are there?
Well, and they're not all from the same franchise. Some of them were independent films, and the independent films did really well. So we are doing the Amityville Horror, the 1979 original versus the 2005 remake.
With Ryan Reynolds.
Yes, the remake starring Ryan Reynolds and Melissa George.
Both excellent actors and actresses.
Yes, the original having Margaret Kidder, not to be confused with the Joker, and James Brolin.
Both really good actors.
Both very good. Although, I don't know. I found it easier to really like the main characters in the remake. I didn't really like the characters in the original.
Well, and we had discussed that in the original there's controversy in the fact of our generation now versus generation then.
Yeah.
Parenting then versus parenting now.
Yeah.
And just we were able to relate, I think, to the newer one because
it's also where we saw a lot of the major differences between the two of them.
And also flaws.
And there were basic scenes that were way different. In the original, the opening murder scene is a lot shorter and less graphic.
Yes.
Whereas, in the remake, you get more of a background and a family introduction and an extended explanation or visual explanation of the murders that had occurred in the house.
Of the executions.
Which we want to point this out really quick.
Sure.
We are not going to discuss the actual murders that occurred in the home. We're not discussing it. We're not going to talk about the guy who did it. We will mention he passed away last year while still incarcerated.
Yep. But this is about movie reviews, so
Yes.
we just want to get that out of the way real quick. So yeah, we're not going to talk about the murders at all. However, the murders in the movie... And, or the relatedness of it and, the whole storyline, that's what we're going to stick
Everything
to.
right down to the budget and the worldwide gross was entirely different.
Yeah, it's crazy. The original was only just under $5 million budget, where the remake was 4 times that amount. Mm-hmm. That's crazy.
But the pull-through for the original... and the remake, I mean, if you look at the difference between money of 79 and 2022, they came out pretty neck and neck.
Right. One was at 86 million, the other was at 107 million.
107.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
107.5 million.
And again, during its time in the 70s, 86 million's a shit ton compared to right now, where 107 is actually probably on the lower end of scale.
Yeah, I would think that wouldn't be so great.
In comparison. However, both really good movies.
One of the major things that I noticed when I went back and I rewatched the original quickly after watching the remake was, in the remake, the realtor who's showing them the house, she is visibly anxious and nervous and could not wait to get the hell out of that house. But in the original, she seemed pretty calm up until she was in the house by herself doing paperwork and got scared off by a noise.
Yeah. Simple little... Well, and also in the original, the family already knew about the murders.
That's the other thing. They knew in advance, whereas the remake...
They didn't find out until afterwards.
After they looked through the house and wanted it.
Yeah, and the realtor came outside and was like, hey, by the way, this event happened. You should probably know that this many amount of people died and this is the situation that happened.
Yeah.
And, and then Ryan Reynolds was like, oh, well... a house is just a house. You know,
My brain just went.
said a house is
It's
just
been
a
a day.
house. So, you know, he didn't believe in the hauntings or
Yeah.
anything like that would ever happen.
They were a more believable family unit in the remake than they were in
Absolutely.
the original. I mean, even the mom to child connection
Absolutely.
seemed to be there, whereas in the first, it was very disconnected. And
you couldn't relate to the family
you
at all.
could not even one little bit. And I think it's because it lacked that intro. Like they hinted that there's tension between George and the kids.
Right.
But
they
in
never
the
explained.
remake, they showed it and they
Yes.
explained why
They
it's
explained
there.
the kids' dad
Had died.
had passed away,
Yeah.
and George was basically the newfound stepfather, in which they just got married.
Yeah.
But the oldest son didn't.
And it's always going to
accept
be the oldest. It is.
Well, whichever, but he didn't accept George as the new stepdad. Well, in the original, you don't get any of that.
They mention it,
compassion
but you
or,
don't feel it.
Yeah, at all. There's no
It
connection
does
there.
not register. Ryan Reynolds came across as a very fatherly figure. They
Yes.
weren't his children, but he still showed love, affection, and caring for them. Whereas watching George in the original, that is a man who has no business having children ever.
There was no
Not
love,
never.
no special
You got no tenderness off of him
that's
or
what I was trying
anything.
to. Yeah, there was.
And even towards his wife.
Yeah.
Before moving into the house, you don't get any softness from him. But we had mentioned that could be an era thing.
Exactly.
Where men had to be men in the 70s.
In the original, they also showed that because George was in partnership with his construction.
Yeah, you actually get to
You
meet.
gotta meet the partner. You gotta see how George's withdrawal from the business, how it's affecting payroll, how it's affecting this, that, and the other.
You see the financial struggle in the original one, whereas in the remake,
They blow past that.
You don't really hear much about the
Nope.
financial struggle.
You don't see either one of them working, and we didn't even mention that when we watched
Doesn't
it.
she have a job?
Doesn't he? He mentioned that he
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. At
Bill-
least they gave some
constructor,
explanation to it in the original.
Yes. Another thing that they did in the original versus the remake, and we also talked about this being an era thing, is that in the original there was heavy religious influence.
It was saturated
Excuse me.
in religious undertones, whereas the remake had very little.
One scene.
Very little.
There was one major scene.
Yeah. They
that-
had so many scenes in the original that involved the church.
and involved a particular priest that came
Yeah.
into the house, which he was, he had just shown up, and he had to go talk about getting an exorcism done and all this crap.
They even went so far as to introduce Kathy's aunt, who happened to be a nun.
A nun. And in the
Very saturated in religion.
And in the remake, they do none of that. They completely kick all that out. And again, that's one of those things where we talked about it's an era thing. Because in the 70s, the exorcism had just came out not too long before that.
The 60s had just ended, brotherly love and all that. You're reaching towards the end of the 70s. You're coming into the 80s.
The fear of religion.
Yeah,
needs to
you're
be
seeing
struck back into,
seeing all the beginning of satanic panic coming up,
Yes.
and of course everything's blamed on godlessness.
So the fact of there being such a major influence of religion in the first one can totally see that. However, watching it, it's completely unnecessary. Does not help the story
Yes,
out
I was
at
really
all.
glad to see they left that out when
Absolutely.
they remade it, because I really thought that was absolutely unnecessary.
It had nothing to do with the story or the progress of the movie.
Yeah, the struggle that the priest was going through getting the church to go out and look at the house honestly didn't matter.
No, there's
I really could have cared less the struggle they were going through. Please go back to the house. I want to see what's going on at the house.
There's 8 minutes of him arguing with his other members of the church.
Although he had a really good, his scene was great. He got very passionate.
But then he was put down like a dog, as soon as the elder priest came in.
Yeah, well, and then going blind, and
And that's another
none
thing.
of it played an important role.
That's another huge thing from the first to the original, or from the original to the remake, and I really like that they did this in the remake. Is in the original, the influence of the house went past the property. they were being possessed in a sense where like the car would stop working. It would go
after the vehicles once people were so many miles away,
and George was influenced at the wedding party.
The wedding, yeah.
And it's like it didn't make sense where in the remake with Ryan Reynolds, as soon as he left the property, he instantly felt better. He looked better. The bags under his eyes would go away.
Yeah.
And this is what was crazy is as they showed that throughout the movie, and as soon as he entered that property again, instantly changed to a different person.
And this was something I had mentioned to you. At a point in time, I was really, really heavy into watching things like Ghost Hunters and stuff like that. I found it entertaining. I found it interesting. I took no stock in it. However, the original did not follow along with some of the atypical ghost stories. It really didn't. But the second one did. That being able to leave and suddenly you have that relief. It's something that's described so often by people who claim that they're being haunted in their homes.
It did not leave the property line.
No, and I liked that. It made that place seem so much more ominous.
Right. Right.
One of the major things that I really did not like about the remake, in the original, Hank was not murdered. He was rescued from the house by George. Yep. He went all the way back to rescue that dog.
Right.
In the remake, Ryan Reynolds' character, George, killed the dog.
Yes.
And it's making me teary. Teary.
That was a major, another major difference between the two.
Yeah. But, the black goo.
Yeah.
No, you do not see the black goo in the remake, whereas in the original, it's coming out of their toilet. It's even a great big hole in the ground in their basement filled with this goo.
And there's no explanation.
But there's no explanation of the goo.
No.
And they don't... I guess they decided it just wasn't necessary.
It wasn't.
The flies attacking the priest in the remake was so cool.
It was.
It had... That would have scared the crumb out of me.
But again, that's that heavy religious influence that they were trying to do. The how Satan, rotten flesh attracts flies.
Yeah.
So that was a huge thing. Where in the remake, it was unnecessary.
They also showed Kathy experiencing so much more than just a few sounds here and there. Like she actually saw red glowing eyes out the window. She was smelling stuff. She wasn't just hearing and seeing a few things here and there.
It was more interactive with her.
But they did play up the Ketchum legend more in the remake than they did in the original. And I think that's kind of where it lost me in the remake. When they started that whole, oh, hey, what's down in the basement? Oh, it's a torture chamber. That lost me.
Yeah, because and I think it was because they were trying to make it their own at the same sense.
I mean, and the effects were cool. The makeup. Ooh.
And it tried to make it to where, of course, the land was basically possessed by... Poisoned by the evil that happened there. Unbelievable story, but... However, the movie itself, I thought was good.
Yeah, and I thought it was weird that they brought that in because it was mentioned very briefly in the original.
Right. Where this one
And there is absolutely no historical facts that support any of it.
Nope.
So, I mean, overall, like I said, I like them both. They're both great. I remember the original kind of scaring me a little wonky when I was a kid because I was like 8 when I watched it the first time. Kind of scared the bejesus out of me. But when it comes down to that nitty gritty raw sitting at the edge of your seat just chewing your nail kind of thing, the original does not have that for me.
It's a 2 out of 5.
I would definitely say it's a 2.
Yep, 2 out of 5.
And I'm being kind by saying that.
Yep. And not much better for the remake. However, it was more believable in the sense of certain situations happening.
The family dynamic was more believable, and I liked the characters. I gotta say, thank you, Hollywood, for keeping Ryan Reynolds shirtless through 90% of the movie.
Yeah.
Really? But yeah, remake, I'm gonna go ahead and just say
3
a
out of
3.
5.
I'm gonna say a 3. It was good, but it wasn't that good.
Absolutely.
But yep, so that's the Amityville Horror remake versus the original.
Thank you guys so much for another episode of Gore to be Gore.
And every single one of you have very pleasant nightmares.